online learning. This is grade 6 English. Today we are going to go a little backwards to Unit 7. On Unit 7, we are on page 108, and we are still looking at poetry, but only now, this time, we are looking at how language has changed over time. Now, each and every day, each and every time, you see that there is, or people are developing new words, new language. It's the same English which you speak, but each and every day you see that you have new language, you have new words. So over time, as time passes by, language has changed. Language has changed from one word to another word, from one sentence to another sentence. Now, on page 108, how language has changed over time. You see, these poems which we are learning now, these poems which people write now, they use words or language which has developed now. Okay. But if you go to Shakespearean time, the time Shakespeare was writing, the Shakespearean literature, you see that the language which is there, which he used, which they used to use that time, is different from the language which we are using right now. It's very, very different. But how? How different is the language? How different is it? Now, the poem Silver and the Listeners were written over 100 years ago. The poem Silver and Listeners was written 100 years ago. Let's go to the poem Listeners, poetry which tells a story, which is page 104. It says, "Is there anybody there?" said the traveler, knocking on the moonlit door, and his horse in the silence champed the grass of the forest's ferny floor, and a bird flew up out of the turret above the traveler's head. And he smote upon the door again a second time. "Is there anybody there?" he said. But no one descended. No one descended to the traveler. No heat from the leaf-fringed sill leaned over and looked into his grey eyes, where he stood perplexed and still. Now, let's look down there. There's a glossary there. That glossary there contains words, vocabulary. The first word is sill. Sill there, it's stand for window sill, right? Second one is perplexed. Perplexed stands for puzzled. All right. The other one is dwelt. Dwelt stands for lived. Dwelt stands for lived. The other one is cropping. Cropping, it's cutting or eating. Another one is neath. Neath there stands for beneath. Spec is an archaic word meaning spoke. Okay, spec means spoke. Now, look. Right now we talk about we have spoke, like speaking, but the time 100 years ago it was spec. You see the change there. Get me right. I've read you the poem. Now we are looking at the glossary. We are looking at the words which are there. So we are talking about spec now. Spec is an archaic word which means spoke. Spoke is the past tense of speak. All right. And then we have a. It's an archaic word meaning yes. A is an archaic word which means yes. Now, for instance, in London these days, they say oi. Oi means you. Okay, oi, it means you. Or hey. Turf is it means grass. Turf means grass, the same grass which you have. Like at school, you have the cage. There's a turf there, fisher turf. It's grass. It means grass. So that is on how language has changed over time. So the poem Silver, the listeners, were written over 100 years ago. Both use words and expressions that we no longer use today, such as shoon, which means shoes, and spake, which means spoke. Okay, shoon. Look, you're putting on good shoon. It's more like putting on good shoes. So that's just how language has changed over time. So we're looking at 100 years and reaching now. All right, that's a lot of years. 100 years, reaching 2021. Language has changed throughout, just developed. So that is that on language change. Now, if we look at below, it says here are 4 examples from literature which shows the English language has developed and changed over time. Example 1, we have Middle English, 1100 to 1500. 1100 to 1500. Middle English, that is 1100 to 1500. Now, in the 15th century, Geoffrey Chaucer wrote a poem called The Canterbury Tales. Geoffrey Chaucer wrote a poem called The Canterbury Tales. This poem was about travelers who told one another stories on a journey to Canterbury. This poem was about travelers who told one another stories on a journey to Canterbury. So Geoffrey Chaucer wrote a poem in the 15th century about the Canterbury Tales. So it was a journey whereby the travelers were telling tales to each other. Right. So what Geoffrey Chaucer did, he just wrote poems. Okay, he wrote poems about these stories. Remember, we are looking at the poetry that tells a story. All right. Now, here we are on the middle there. Example 1 on page 108, Middle English, 1100 to 1500, and we're saying that Geoffrey Chaucer wrote a poem called The Canterbury Tales. So, what was the Canterbury Tales about? The Canterbury Tales was about travelers who told one another stories on a journey to Canterbury. All right, a journey to Canterbury. So, we have original language. All right, the original language which Geoffrey Chaucer used, and then we have how we would write and say it now. We have original language, then we have how we would write it or say it now. Now, let's look at the first one. One that the night had thus this tale told. One that the night had thus this tale told. Now, that is original language. That's the Shakespearean language. That is 1500 English. All right. One that the knight had thus his tale told. So let's look at how we would write and say it now. When the knight had told his tale. When the knight had told his tale. All right. That's how we are going to do it now. That's the original language. Now, this is how we are going to say it right now. Right? The second one. The second one is in the root nas there young ni odd. It's not me, it's how the original English was taught. This is how they spoke. In our the root nas there young ni odd. So how do we look at it? This is how we are going to speak about it right now. Everyone on the journey, young or old. In our the root